The transport ship landed on the dark metal platform with a heavy sound that shook the walls. Kate Morgan stood near the exit door with her bag over her shoulder. She looked at the two people standing beside her. Dan was checking his gear one more time. Amy Cole was looking out the small window at the alien world outside. None of them said anything. There was nothing left to say. They had traveled 47 light years from Earth to be here, and now the real test was about to begin. The door opened with a hiss of cold air. Kate stepped out first. The sky above was purple and filled with 3 moons. The air smelled like metal and something sweet she could not name. In front of her stood the largest building she had ever seen. The Galactic Coalition Military Academy rose up from the ground like a mountain made of black glass and silver steel. Thousands of windows glowed with soft light. Ships flew around its towers like insects around a flame. A group of soldiers waited for them at the end of the platform. Kate counted 12 aliens of different species. Some were tall and thin with gray skin and 4 eyes. Others were short and covered in thick brown armor that looked like it grew from their bodies. One of them was massive, with silver scales covering every part of his body and arms as thick as tree trunks. He wore the uniform of a commander, and his eyes were fixed on the 3 humans walking toward him. This was Commander Al. Kate had read his file during the journey. He was a species known for their strength and long lives. He was over 200 years old and had fought in more wars than most species had recorded in their history books. He had trained thousands of soldiers from across the galaxy. He had never trained a human before, and according to the reports Kate had seen, he had tried very hard to make sure he never would. The humans stopped in front of him. Kate saluted in the Earth military style. Dan and Amy did the same. Al looked at them for a long moment without speaking. His silver eyes moved from Kate to Dan to Amy and back again. Then he made a sound deep in his throat that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. He spoke in a voice like stones grinding together. He told them that he had requested their removal from his training unit. He told them that the Coalition Council had his request. He told them that he considered this a waste of his time and their lives. Humans were soft. Humans were weak. Humans broke easily and healed slowly. They had no claws, no armor, no venom, no special abilities of any kind. They were, in his professional opinion, the least suitable species for combat training that he had encountered in 140 years of service. Kate listened without changing her expression. She had heard worse. Every human who left Earth to work with alien species heard worse. It was part of the job. Al continued. He said that he would not lower his standards for them. He would not slow down the training for them. He would not make special rules to protect them from injury. If they could not keep up, they would be sent home. If they were injured, they would be treated and then expected to return to training immediately. If they died, their bodies would be sent back to Earth with a note of condolence. He asked if they understood. Kate said yes, Dan said yes, Amy said yes. Al stared at them for another moment. Then he turned and walked toward the academy. The other aliens followed him. The humans followed the aliens. Inside the academy, Kate saw things that would have seemed impossible just 10 years ago. Hallways that stretched for miles. Training rooms the size of football stadiums. Weapons that could destroy a city held casually by soldiers walking to their next class. She saw species she had only read about in reports, species that could breathe fire or see through walls or move faster than the human eye could track. She saw all of this and kept walking. They were assigned to quarters on the 47th floor. The room was small by alien standards but large enough for the 3 humans. 3 beds, 3 storage units, 1 bathroom, 1 window looking out at the purple sky. Kate dropped her bag on the nearest bed and sat down. Dan closed the door and checked the room for listening devices. He found 2 and disabled them both. Amy set up her medical equipment on the small table in the corner. None of them spoke until Dan gave the signal that the room was clean. Kate told them what she was thinking. She said that Al wanted them to fail. She said that half the species in this academy wanted them to fail. She said that somewhere in the coalition government, Important people were watching to see if humans could handle this level of training. If they washed out, it would set back human integration into the galactic community by decades. If they succeeded, doors would open that had been closed since humanity first made contact with alien life. Dan nodded slowly. He was a calm man who never spoke more than he needed to. He had spent 15 years in ground combat on Earth before being selected for the Coalition exchange program. He had seen things that would break most people. He was not easily impressed and not easily scared. He said that he did not come this far to fail. Amy looked up from her equipment. She was the youngest of them at 26, but she had earned her place on this mission through skill and determination. She had served as a combat medic in 3 war zones on Earth. She had saved lives under fire more times than she could count. She said that she did not care what the aliens thought of humans. She cared about doing her job and doing it well. Kate stood up and walked to the window. The 3 moons hung in the purple sky like eyes watching the world below. Somewhere in this building, Commander Al was probably filing another complaint about having humans in his unit. Somewhere else, aliens were laughing about the soft little species from the backwater planet called Earth. None of that mattered. What mattered was tomorrow. What mattered was the training. What mattered was proving that humanity had earned its place among the stars. She turned back to her team. She told them to get some sleep. Training started at dawn, and she had a feeling it was going to be a long 12 weeks. Dan lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing slowed and he was asleep. Soldiers learned to sleep when they could. Amy worked on her equipment for another hour before doing the same. Kate stayed at the window. She watched the ships flying around the Academy towers. She watched the stars appearing one by one as the sky grew darker. She thought about Earth, about her family, about everything she had left behind to be here. Then she thought about everything that was waiting for her when the sun came up. She did not sleep much that night. She never did before a fight. The first day of training began before the sun rose. A loud alarm filled the human quarters at 4 in the morning. Kate was already awake. Dan rolled out of bed and was dressed in 30 seconds. Amy grabbed her medical kit out of habit before remembering she would not need it for her own training. They joined the other recruits in the main hall. There were 47 soldiers from 12 different species standing in formation. They stood in the back because of their size. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that could stop a bullet. Their 4 arms hung at their sides like weapons waiting to be used. They stood near the front. They were tall and thin with silver skin and 2 sets of eyes. Their reflexes were 3 times faster than any human because they had 2 nervous systems working together. Commander Al walked in at exactly 4:30. He did not greet them or ask how they slept. He simply announced that the first exercise would be an endurance march through the eastern training grounds. The atmosphere in that region contained 40% less oxygen than standard. Any recruit who fell behind would be left behind. Any recruit who stopped moving would be failed. The march lasted 9 hours. Kate felt her lungs burning after the first hour. By the 3rd hour, her legs felt like they were filled with sand. Dan stayed beside her, his breathing heavy but steady. Amy fell back twice but pushed herself forward again each time. Around them, aliens who were built for this kind of punishment moved with ease. They barely seemed to notice the thin air. They jogged ahead and then waited for the others to catch up. 2 recruits dropped out before noon. One was a small reptilian creature who collapsed and could not get back up. The other was a who twisted his leg in a rock formation and had to be carried back to base. The humans kept moving. When the march finally ended, Kate could barely stand. Her vision was blurry and her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. But she was still standing. Dan was beside her. Amy was a few steps behind them, pale and shaking but upright. Al looked at them with an expression Kate could not read. He said nothing and walked away. The days that followed were worse. Combat training against opponents who outweighed the humans by hundreds of pounds. Tactical simulations where the humans were always at a disadvantage. weapons training with guns designed for hands much larger than their own. Every exercise seemed designed to show how weak and slow and fragile humans were compared to the other species. In the second week, Dan took a hit during a sparring match that should have broken his ribs. The sound of the impact echoed through the training room. Every alien in the room expected him to fall. Instead, Dan stepped back, adjusted his stance, and continued fighting. He lost the match, but he finished it. The medical scan afterward showed 2 cracked ribs. He was back in training the next morning with tape wrapped around his chest. Amy was caught in a chemical exposure drill without her protective mask. The gas burned her throat and lungs before she could reach safety. The medical staff told her she would need 3 days to recover. She was back in formation after 2 days with her voice reduced to a rough whisper. When Al asked if she was fit for duty, she said yes and did not explain further. Kate watched everything. That was her gift. She was not the strongest or the fastest, but she saw things other people missed. She watched the way they moved during combat. She watched the patterns in the tactical simulations. She watched how Al designed each exercise to exploit specific weaknesses, and she remembered everything. In the third week, Anamda broke 3 limbs during a sparring accident. She was sent to medical rehabilitation, and everyone expected her to wash out. Instead, she returned 4 days later with metal braces on her arms and leg. She stood in formation like nothing had happened. That evening, approached the humans in the mess hall. Her 4 eyes studied them with something that might have been curiosity. She asked if she could sit with them. Kate said yes. I asked how they did it. She had watched them take punishment that should have stopped them. She had seen Dan fight with broken ribs. She had seen Amy return from an injury that would have kept her in bed for a week. She wanted to understand how humans kept moving when their bodies should have failed. Kate thought about the question for a long time. Then she tried to explain. She told her that humans did not evolve as the strongest creatures on their planet. They were not the fastest or the most dangerous. Their world was filled with predators that could kill them easily. The weather alone killed millions over the centuries. Diseases swept through their population again and again. By every logical measure, humans should have gone extinct 100 times over. But they did not. They survived because they refused to stop. Their bodies learned to keep functioning through pain. Their minds learned to treat agony as information instead of a signal to quit. When a human was injured, something inside them said to keep going anyway. It was not courage. It was not strength. It was simply how they were built. I listened without interrupting. When Kate finished, there was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that her people had a word for creatures who did not know when to stop. The word did not translate well, but it meant something like those who run toward death. She said it was not meant as a compliment. Kate smiled and said that humans had a word like that too. They called it being stubborn. I made a clicking sound that Kate was learning to recognize as laughter. From that day forward, she sat with the humans at every meal. She trained with them when the schedule allowed. She asked questions about Earth and listened carefully to the answers. Other aliens noticed. A young named started watching the humans during training. He never spoke to them, but Kate saw him taking notes after their exercises. A female named stopped making jokes about human weakness after watching Dan recover from his injuries. The training continued. More recruits washed out. The exercises grew harder. And slowly, so slowly that most of the aliens did not notice, something began to change. The humans were not just surviving anymore. They were adapting. They were learning. And in the quiet moments between exercises, Kate Morgan was planning for what came next. She knew that survival was not enough. To earn respect in this place, they would have to do something more. They would have to do something that none of the aliens expected. They would have to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. The opportunity would come in the 6th week. Kate did not know it yet, but she was about to walk into history. The morning of the 6th week began like any other. The alarm woke the recruits before dawn. The soldiers gathered in the main hall. Commander Al stood at the front with his silver scales catching the light. But this time, there was something different in his voice when he spoke. He announced that today would be the intermediate combat evaluation. The recruits had survived 6 weeks of basic training. Now it was time to test what they had learned. He told them to follow him. They walked through corridors that Kate had never seen before. The walls here were older than the rest of the academy. The metal was darker, scratched and dented from centuries of use. They descended 3 levels underground until they reached a massive circular room. In the center of the room stood a chamber made of black glass and silver metal. It was 30 feet wide and shaped like a cylinder. Through the glass, Kate could see something moving inside. Blades. Dozens of blades spinning and rotating in complex patterns. Each blade glowed with a faint blue light that Kate recognized as plasma edging. One touch from those blades would cut through flesh and bone like they were made of paper. Al explained the exercise. It was called the blade drill. It was an ancient training device, older than the academy itself. The objective was simple: enter the chamber on one side and exit on the other side without being cut. The blades moved in calculated patterns that changed every few seconds. A skilled warrior could learn to read the patterns and move through them. An unskilled warrior would be cut to pieces. He told them that no one was expected to complete the drill on their first attempt. The purpose was not to succeed. The purpose was to learn their limits, to understand how much further they had to go. He showed them the scars on his own arms, pale lines against his silver scales. These were from his first time in the blade drill. He had been young and foolish and thought he was invincible. The blades had taught him otherwise. They went first. Their natural armor protected them from the worst of the damage, but even they came out with burns and cuts. One of them, a large male named, made it 3/4 of the way through before a blade caught his shoulder and opened a gash 6 inches long. He stumbled out of the chamber with blood running down his arm and pride burning in his eyes. They performed better. Their fast reflexes allowed them to dodge most of the blades. Entered the chamber with her 4 eyes tracking every movement. She danced between the spinning edges with a grace that made the other recruits stop and watch. She made it all the way through with only a single cut along her forearm. When she stepped out, she looked at Kate and gave a small nod. Then it was time for the humans. Dan went first. He studied the blades for 30 seconds before entering. He moved carefully, using his combat training to predict the patterns. He made it halfway through before a blade came from an angle he had not expected. It sliced across his shoulder and he dove forward, rolling under 2 more blades before throwing himself out of the chamber. Blood soaked through his shirt, but he was smiling. Halfway was better than he had expected. Amy went next. She watched the blades even longer than Dan had. When she entered, she moved in short bursts, stopping and starting as the patterns shifted. She made it further than Dan, nearly reaching the exit before a blade caught her left arm and burned across her torso. She staggered out with her teeth clenched against the pain. The medical staff moved forward to treat her, but she waved them off. She would wait until the exercise was over. Kate Morgan stepped up to the chamber entrance. She did not move. She stood completely still with her eyes fixed on the spinning blades. The other recruits grew restless. Al was about to order her to begin when she held up one hand without looking at him. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. Kate did not blink. Her eyes moved back and forth, tracking each blade, following each rotation. Her mind was doing something that no one in the room could see. She was counting. She was measuring. She was building a map inside her head of every blade, every pattern, every gap in the deadly dance of metal and light. 40 seconds. They started muttering among themselves. They exchanged glances. A leaned forward with her 4 eyes wide. Kate stepped into the chamber. What happened next would be remembered for years. Kate Morgan did not run. She did not dodge or dive or throw herself through gaps in the blades. She walked. Each step was placed with perfect precision, her body turning and shifting by fractions of an inch. A blade swept toward her throat and she tilted her head just enough for it to pass. Another blade came for her legs and she stepped over it without breaking stride. A third blade spun toward her chest and she turned her body sideways, letting it pass so close that it stirred the fabric of her shirt. She walked through the blade drill like she was taking a stroll through a park. Her face showed no fear, no panic, no strain, just calm focus, just absolute concentration, just a human being doing what humans had done for 200,000 years, watching, learning, adapting, surviving. She reached the center of the chamber. The blades were thicker here, faster, more unpredictable. Any normal soldier would have been cut a dozen times by now. Kate Morgan kept walking. A blade came from her left and she dropped her shoulder. A blade came from her right and she stepped back. A blade came from above and she ducked forward, letting it pass over her head while she continued moving toward the exit. The last 10 feet were the hardest. The patterns changed 3 times in rapid succession. Kate stopped for half a second, her eyes flicking left and right. Then she moved again, her body weaving between the blades like water flowing around stones. She stepped out of the chamber on the far side. Not a single mark on her body. Not a cut, not a burn, not even a tear in her clothes. She had walked through the blade drill without being touched. The room was completely silent. Every alien stared at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to shock to something that might have been fear. A's mouth hung open, had forgotten about the wound on his shoulder. Even the medical staff had stopped moving. Commander Al walked toward her slowly. His silver eyes studied her face like he was seeing a human for the first time. He asked her how she had done it. Kate thought about the question. She told him that human brains were built to find patterns. It was how her species had survived on a dangerous world. They saw patterns in the weather, in the seasons, in the movements of predators. They saw patterns everywhere, even where none existed. The blade drill was just another pattern. She had watched it long enough to map it in her mind. Then she had walked the path that her brain had already calculated. Al was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Kate did not expect. He said that in his 140 years of service, he had seen only 3 soldiers complete the blade drill untouched on their first attempt. All of them had gone on to become legends. He looked at Kate Morgan and said that today he had seen the 4th. Kate did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply nodded and walked back to stand with Dan and Amy. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the concentration had broken. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but on the outside she showed nothing. The blade drill was over. The evaluation was complete. And somewhere in the minds of every alien who had watched, a small seed had been planted. A seed of doubt about everything they thought they knew about humans. That seed was about to grow. Word spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. By that evening, every soldier in the building had heard the story. A human had completed the blade drill without a single mark. A human from a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 6 years ago. A human with no claws, no armor, no special abilities of any kind. The story grew with each telling until it barely resembled what had actually happened. Kate tried to ignore the attention. She went to the mess hall for dinner and found that every seat near her was suddenly occupied by aliens who wanted to talk to her. They asked how she had done it. They asked if humans had some secret power that the galaxy did not know about. They asked if she could teach them. Kate answered their questions politely but briefly. She ate her food and returned to her quarters as soon as she could. Dan was waiting for her with a smile on his face. He told her that he had received 17 requests for sparring matches since the blade drill. Soldiers who had ignored him for 6 weeks suddenly wanted to test themselves against a human. Amy reported that the medical staff had asked her to give a presentation on human healing techniques. The entire academy seemed to have noticed the humans overnight. The next morning, Commander Al called Kate to his office. She had never been inside his private quarters before. The room was simple and clean, decorated only with weapons mounted on the walls. Each weapon had a story. Each story ended with Al standing over a defeated enemy. He told her to sit. She sat. Al explained that her performance in the blade drill had attracted attention beyond the academy. Instructors from other units had requested permission to observe her training. Scientists from the Coalition's Xenobiology Division had asked to study her neural pathways. Two members of the Coalition Council had sent messages asking for reports on her progress. She was no longer just a recruit. She was a symbol. Kate asked what that meant for her training. Al said it meant nothing. She would continue with her unit. She would complete the same exercises as everyone else. She would be held to the same standards. The only difference was that now everyone would be watching. Every success would be noticed. Every failure would be discussed. She had painted a target on her back, and every alien who doubted human capability would be looking for a chance to prove that she was nothing special. Kate said she understood. Al studied her face for a moment, then he nodded and dismissed her. The weeks that followed were intense. Kate found herself assigned to leadership positions in tactical exercises. Al asked for her input during strategy sessions. When she spoke, the other recruits listened in a way they had not listened before. She was careful not to let the attention change her. She trained as hard as she always had. She studied the exercises as closely as she always did. She helped Dan and Amy when they struggled and accepted help when she struggled herself. Became her closest friend among the aliens. They spent hours with Kate, learning human combat techniques and sharing her own knowledge in return. She told Kate that her people had underestimated humanity. She said that mistake would not be repeated. Kate appreciated the honesty. The young named approached Kate one afternoon. He had been watching her since the first week, taking notes on everything she did. Now he finally worked up the courage to speak to her. He asked if she would teach him how she had navigated the blade drill. Kate agreed. She spent 3 hours explaining her technique. It was not about speed or reflexes. It was about seeing the pattern. It was about mapping the movement in your mind before you moved your body. It was about trusting the calculation even when every instinct screamed at you to run. Practiced for days. He improved significantly, though he never matched Kate's performance. He thanked her for her teaching and told her that among his people there was a saying, "The stars favor the patient." Kate smiled and told him that humans had a different saying, "Fortune favors the bold." But the attention brought problems as well. A delegation from the Dominion filed a formal inquiry with the Academy. They claimed that the humans must have cheated somehow. They demanded that Kate be examined for illegal enhancements. They suggested that her performance was physically impossible and therefore must have been achieved through deception. The inquiry lasted 3 days. Kate was subjected to medical scans that examined every part of her body. Scientists tested her reflexes, her vision, her neural pathways, her muscle density, her bone structure. They found nothing unusual. She was a baseline human with no modifications of any kind. The inquiry was dismissed, but before the delegation left the academy, their leader requested a private meeting with Kate. His name was General. He was old even by standards, with armor that had turned dark gray with age and scars that covered every visible part of his body. He had fought in wars that Kate had only read about in history files. He commanded respect from every species in the Coalition. He sat across from Kate in a small meeting room. For a long time he said nothing. He simply looked at her with his small dark eyes. Then he spoke. He told her that his people had built an empire on strength. They had conquered worlds and crushed enemies through sheer physical power. For 10,000 years, they had been the most feared warriors in their region of space. And now, a soft-skinned creature from a backwater planet had done something that most could never do. He told her that he had underestimated humanity. He would not make that mistake again, and neither would the Dominion. Kate heard the threat beneath his words. She filed it away and responded calmly. She told him that humans did not want to be enemies of the. They wanted to be allies. They wanted to learn from the Coalition and contribute to it. They wanted to prove that they had earned their place among the stars. General laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. He told her that wanting something and earning it were two different things. Humans had surprised him once. He would be watching to see if they could do it again. He stood and left the room without another word. Kate sat alone for several minutes after he was gone. She thought about what he had said. She thought about the weeks of training still ahead. She thought about the final evaluation that would determine whether she and Dan and Amy had truly earned their place in the coalition military. She knew now that the blade drill had been just the beginning. The real test was still coming, and when it came, the entire galaxy would be watching. Kate stood up, straightened her uniform, and walked back to training. There was still work to do. The final evaluation came on the last day of the 12th week. Every recruit who had survived the training gathered in the main hall before dawn. Kate stood with Dan and Amy in their usual spot. Stood nearby with Ann. They had become something like a team over the past weeks, though none of them would have admitted it out loud. Commander Al entered the hall with a data pad in his hand. His expression was harder than usual. He announced that the final evaluation would be a simulated planetary assault. The unit would attack an entrenched enemy position and capture a command center. They would face superior numbers. They would face difficult terrain. They would have limited supplies and no reinforcements. It was designed to be the hardest test they had ever faced. What he did not tell them was that someone had made it even harder. General had used his influence to have the simulation modified. The enemy numbers had been tripled. The communication systems would be jammed. The terrain would be filled with traps and hazards that the unit could not anticipate. The general had decided that if the humans were going to succeed, they would have to earn it in ways that no recruit had ever been asked to earn it before. The simulation began at dawn. The unit deployed into a rocky canyon with red dust filling the air. Kate could barely see 20 feet ahead. Dan took point with his combat training. Amy stayed in the middle with her medical kit ready. Al led from the front, his silver scales covered in tactical armor. Everything went wrong in the first 5 minutes. Enemy soldiers appeared from positions that should have been empty. The unit's communications went dead. 2 recruits were hit by simulated fire and marked as casualties before they could react. The formation broke apart as soldiers scattered for cover. Al tried to rally them. He moved forward to engage the enemy and walked directly into an artillery strike that the simulation had not warned them about. His armor locked into protective mode and he collapsed, marked as combat disabled. The chain of command shattered. The remaining soldiers huddled behind rocks and debris, pinned down by enemy fire from 3 directions. Was bleeding from a wound in her leg. Was trying to reach 2 trapped soldiers and taking fire every time he moved. Was staring at the chaos with wide eyes, frozen by the sudden collapse of everything they had trained for. Kate looked at the situation and made a decision. She stood up behind her cover and called out to the unit. Her voice cut through the noise of simulated weapons fire. She told them to form up on her position. She told them they had 3 minutes to regroup before the enemy overwhelmed them. She told them that anyone who wanted to survive needed to move right now. The soldiers looked at her. A human was giving orders. A human who had walked through the blade drill untouched. A human who had earned the respect of Al himself. They moved. Within 2 minutes, Kate had gathered the surviving soldiers behind a rock formation large enough to provide cover. She counted heads. 12 soldiers left out of the original 24. Dan, Amy, and 7 others. Not enough to take the objective through direct assault. Not even close. She pulled up the terrain map on her tactical display. The enemy expected them to attack from the canyon floor where they had defensive positions. But there was another path. A toxic swamp to the east that the simulation had marked as impassable. The chemicals in that swamp would burn exposed skin and cause respiratory damage. No sane commander would send soldiers through it. Kate told them her plan. They would split into 2 groups. Group 1 would provide a distraction, drawing enemy attention toward the canyon floor. Group 2 would move through the swamp and flank the enemy position from behind. It was insane by every standard of military doctrine. It required them to trust her with their lives. Stood up to his full height. The who had once mocked humans for being weak looked at Kate with something new in his eyes. He asked why they should follow her into certain defeat. Kate met his gaze without flinching. She told him that humans had been defeating certain death for 200,000 years, every ice age that should have frozen them, every plague that should have wiped them out, every predator, every disaster, every extinction event that should have ended their species. They survived not because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because when everything fell apart, they found a way to hold on. That was what humans carried with them, not claws, not armor. Just the absolute refusal to stay down. Was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded and said he would follow her. They all did. Kate led Group 2 into the swamp. The chemicals burned her skin and made her eyes water. Her lungs felt like they were filled with fire. Dan moved beside her, his face twisted in pain but his feet still moving forward. Amy was already treating chemical burns on a while they walked. Stumbled twice but got back up each time. They emerged from the swamp behind enemy lines. Their skin was red and blistered. Their breathing was ragged, but they were alive and they were where no one expected them to be. The attack was swift and brutal. Group 1 launched their distraction and the enemy turned to meet them. Group 2 hit the command center from behind. Kate led the charge through the door, her weapon firing at targets that never saw her coming. Dan cleared the left side of the room while cleared the right. In less than 3 minutes, the objective was secured. The simulation ended. The lights in the room came on and the enemy soldiers disappeared. Al's armor unlocked and he stood up, looking around at the captured command center with an expression of disbelief. The unit had achieved a perfect score. Against impossible odds, with their commander disabled and their communications jammed, they had completed the mission. In the debriefing room, Al stood before his recruits for a long time without speaking. Kate stood at attention with her skin still burning from the chemical exposure and her lungs still aching with every breath. Dan stood beside her. Amy stood beside him, and stood nearby. Finally, Al turned to Kate. He performed the gesture of respect, a slow bow with both hands pressed to his chest. He told her that he had trained soldiers for 140 years. He had seen bravery and skill from every species in the coalition. But he had never seen anyone walk through the blade drill unmarked, and he had never seen anyone lead a broken unit to victory against impossible odds the way she had. He asked her what humans called what she had done. Kate thought about the question. Her body ached. Her skin burned. She was exhausted in ways she had not known were possible, but she was still standing. Her people were still standing. They had come to this place as outsiders, as jokes, as the soft little species from the backwater planet. They were leaving as something else entirely. She shrugged and told him that humans called it Tuesday. The room was silent. Then a made her clicking laugh, joined her, even made a rumbling sound that might have been a chuckle. Al's face did not smile, but his silver eyes softened in a way that Kate had never seen before. Outside the debriefing room, the stars burned cold and bright in the purple sky. Ships flew between worlds. Empires rose and fell. The galaxy continued on as it always had, vast and ancient and indifferent to the small beings who traveled through it. But something had changed. In this academy on this day, a human had proven that her species belonged among the stars. The story would spread from soldier to soldier, from planet to planet, from species to species. Humans were not weak. Humans were not fragile. Humans were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. Kate looked out the viewport one last time. Then she turned back to her unit, her team, her family, and began planning for whatever came next. The galaxy had taken notice of humanity. It would never see them the same way again.